Good afternoon and welcome to the Hudson Institute Online. I'm Blaise Misztal, a fellow here at Hudson, and I'm delighted to be joining you today for our event on international cooperation for development and pandemic preparedness, lessons from COVID-19. I am honored to have participating with me today Director General Shinichi Saida from the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Director James Richardson from the U.S. Department of State. Also joining me to help moderate the conversation is Nobuhiro Aizawa from the Wilson Center. I'll introduce all of them in more detail in a little bit, but first let me frame our conversation today. One of the most striking developments of the nearly three-quarter century since the end of World War II has been the transition that we have witnessed as countries that received U.S. economic assistance after the war not only grew into modern, robust, and prosperous democracies, but also themselves emerged as major international donors, working jointly with the United States in pursuit of common goals, including alleviating poverty and sustaining a free and open international order that benefits all. Perhaps no country is a better example of this than Japan, which in 2019 provided over $15 billion in official development assistance, ranking it as one of the top 5 most generous developed countries. Even more importantly, Japan has led the way in innovating new development tools, including through infrastructure investment and new finance tools. Nowhere is the importance and power of international cooperation between like-minded partners more evident than in the field of global health. Growing out of the 2001 G8 meeting in Okinawa, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria has invested nearly $50 billion to improve the health and well-being of people around the world. Through programs like PEPFAR, the United States has put another $90 billion towards empowering countries with the capabilities to care for their own citizens. Together, these programs have not only helped millions of people deal with diseases like AIDS, but have also built health systems that have proven resilient and effective in the face of other health challenges like Ebola and now, of course, COVID-19. All of us at the Hudson Institute have, of course, been following the coronavirus crisis and especially its geopolitical implications quite closely. You can find more events and in-depth research examining the current situation at hudson.org. Today's discussion will focus on the international cooperation between democratic partners that has created successful development programs like the Global Fund, the alternatives and challenges to this development model being put forward by authoritarian states like China, and it will look to the future of foreign assistance as we learn from the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll hear brief opening statements from our 2 esteemed guests, Director Richardson and Director General Saida, after which Dr. Aizawa and myself will put some questions to them for about half an hour or so. With that, allow me to introduce James Richardson and invite him to give the first opening statement. Mr. Richardson is the Director of the Office of Foreign Assistance Resources at the U.S. Department of State, where he coordinates $35 billion in foreign assistance across the State Department, the U.S. Agency for International Development. Director Richardson came to State from USAID, where he led its transformation task force, responsible for a historic reorganization of the agency, as well as serving as assistant to the administrator for policy planning and learning. Prior to that, Director Richardson spent many years on Capitol Hill, most recently as Chief of Staff to then Congressman Mike Pompeo. It is safe to say that Director Richardson has been involved in almost every branch of government and every agency responsible for U.S. foreign assistance, giving him an unusually comprehensive understanding of this important U.S. tool. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Director Richardson.
Great, thanks, Blaise. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, to be with the Hudson Institute, to be with Director General Saida. I have a great appreciation for the Japanese people and its culture, but also its generosity, and have had a great opportunity to work with the Japanese ministry at the DAC, at OECD, to really try to better sync our development policies. I think we share so much in common with the way that we think about the world, and the importance of development and what that means, and how we can strengthen countries around the world in order to be able to resist malign influences. But as the director of foreign assistance, it's really it gives me a great great vantage point to see the generosity of the American people, and the compassion that we have for folks all around the world. Over the past 20 years alone, the American people have invested over almost $500 billion in official development assistance, including $140 billion in global health alone. That's really built along with our great partners around the world, including the Japanese. This was really built a great foundation for which global health systems are based today. We have a proven track record building the capacity of systems, training healthcare workers, and saving lives. Our model of development is very similar to that of the Japanese, where we value liberty, free market principles, individual freedom, and human dignity. We uphold rule of law, advance women's economic empowerment, and create an enabling environment for businesses to be able to thrive. We believe that a vibrant and fully functioning community is not only vital to the success of a country, but makes for longstanding and productive partners with the United States and our partners that directly benefit all of our national interest and economic interest. Time and time again, U.S. foreign aid, like those of our like-minded partners, has proven to save lives and help friends around the world. In contrast to that model, we do see other models of assistance, and we've seen it from Angola to Zambia. We see a sort of an authoritarian approach to development that can lead to unsustainable debt, to undermine sovereignty, and to limit economic, political, and social freedoms. So we have to be vigilant. In the recent example of Sri Lanka has had a really hard time struggling to repay debt and hand over a strategic port to China on a 99-year lease, a move that we all see as a potential threat to Sri Lankan national sovereignty. Across the globe, we really see a mercantilistic approach to development that focuses on strategic mineral rights, port access, and quite frankly, bribery as leverage points to advance their own interest. We really need to think about this two different models of development, one that is focused on what's good for that country that we are investing and good for the global order, and the other, this authoritarian approach, which is really based upon what's good for that authoritarian actor. That alternative model of authoritarian regimes getting involved into development space has really, I fear, has led to a backsliding of governance and transparency. When you overlay that with what we are seeing in the pandemic, we really fear that type of threat of backsliding could be exacerbated with the pandemic. The pandemic has really highlighted the importance of transparency, of accountability, and of enforcement of global standards. When information is restricted, consequences can be devastating. And we see that very clearly with the outbreak of the COVID-19. And we really fear that continued progress over the long term. As the disease has spread, we have seen some of these authoritarian regimes, including China, sort of engage in a mass diplomacy, where they are trying to provide highly visible assistance, but it often comes at the expense of the recipients themselves. At least 51 countries have reported faulty Chinese personal protective equipment and test kits. I think we really do have an opportunity and obligation to clearly demonstrate to the world what true development looks like. And I think we can use the history that the United States and Japan has taken over the past many years as a clear demonstration of a good way to do assistance, and something we want to double down on. In the pandemic itself, we've invested $1.3 billion to 120 countries around the world, and we've been transparent about what we are providing. and why. Some of the work that we have done, we've virtually trained thousands of healthcare workers, 20,000 actually in India alone, trying to leverage the power of digital technology and help prepare local response plans. So let me pause there, but I do think that this pandemic has clearly demonstrated a difference of approach and an opportunity for like-minded democracies around the world to say this is the right way to approach development in this time of pandemics. And with that, let me pitch it back over to Blaise.
Thank you, Director Richardson, and thanks for drawing that really stark contrast between the spirit of generosity that informs development assistance from countries like the US and Japan versus maybe the selfishness that drives other countries. So allow me now to introduce my co-moderator, Nobihiro Aizawa, an associate professor at Kyushu University's Department of Social and Cultural Studies, and currently a Japan scholar at the Wilson Center here in Washington, DC. He specializes in Southeast Asian politics, overseas Chinese and international relations in East Asia. Previously, he has been a researcher at Japan's National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies and the Japan External Trade Organization's Institute of Developing Economies. He received his PhD in area studies from Kyoto University. So let me turn it over to you, Professor Aizawa.
Well, thank you very much, Blaise, for the kind introduction. And it is my great pleasure and a privilege to welcome Ambassador Shinichi Saida to our session. He is now a Deputy Director General of International Cooperation Bureau at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has been a career diplomat for 3 decades and taken a role of key positions in international trade and development policies. So we can't think of more of a better person to welcome him in this theme today. Most notably, his career highlights includes his ambassadorship to the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. He has also been ambassador for TICAD, that is the Tokyo International Conference of African Development, which is one of the flagship programs of Japanese foreign policies to Africa. He was a Deputy Director General of African Affairs Development at the MOFA. And with delight, we were informed that today he was appointed as the Chief of Economic Department at the Japanese Embassy in Washington, DC. So we are looking very much forward to having him in person in DC. So in this theme of development assistance, especially on assistance on healthcare, is most needed in times of post-crisis. We can't have better person as Director General Saida. So Director General Saida, the floor is yours.
With great interest, I listened to the statement by Mr. Richardson, particularly his remarks that upholding the value we share are really crucial. And on this basis, we have been promoting the Japan-US bilateral cooperation and coordination as elaborated by him. And based upon that, I'd like to briefly explain Japan's development assistance in response to COVID-19 disaster from the perspective with the focus on how to deal with the alternate donor. Our COVID-19 response so far amounts to $1.7 billion and is composed of 3 parts. First, our emergency contribution to international organizations, approximately $1.1 billion was disbursed to them, international health as well as humanitarian organizations. And second, bilateral emergency grant aid. We plan to extend medical equipment to 92 vulnerable countries worth $5.3 million. Among them, $3 million was already contracted with strong focus on Asia Pacific. These are building upon our decades-long efforts to establish universal health coverage in developing countries. And third, we secured a budget for bilateral concessional emergency loans up to $4.5 billion for mitigating economic shocks caused by COVID-19. We just started with $300 million to Philippines yesterday, to be followed by other Asian countries like Bangladesh, Indonesia, Myanmar, and India. All of them are carried out in perfect consistency with the existing ODA rules, including those on transparency and concessionality. Friends in need is friend indeed. We believe this could form at least a counterbalance to a so-called mask diplomacy of China, which seems to be a kind of fragmented one-shot remedy so far. Perhaps we can take advantage of crisis if we do our best to roll back such initiative by alternative donor. Of course, with a big caveat, how the race on vaccines therapeutics will end up. As for our free and open Indo-Pacific strategy and its prospect, I totally share the views expressed by Mr. Richardson, but just a few comments. With the possible economic crisis in the Asia-Pacific region caused by COVID-19, it is anticipated that Chinese debt trap be unbearably imminent for the recipient countries. Pakistan, as disclosed by Hudson Institute's researcher, Mr. Hussein Haqqani, will not be the single instance. Many, including my previous workplace, Ethiopia, will follow soon, I think. We expect that this crisis will be a key incident to prove that we've gone the right way. G20 initiative of debt service suspension will be a first ever initiative involving China. We should carefully watch what they do and should scale up the initiative soon. We've been providing almost $10 billion a year for infrastructure in the region. As everyone noticed, in many cases, we intended to be a counterbalance to BRI. In ports in Sri Lanka, on high-speed railway in Indonesia and India, as well as natural gas development project in Papua New Guinea. However, the competition with China has become drastically tougher these days. In the conventional infrastructure like roads, ports, or even railways, we see the need to involve more competitive contractors from such countries as Turkey or India. On high-tech assistance, including telecom infrastructure, we should consider to set up a new framework or rule to uphold human rights in coordination with European countries. Situation in several African countries like Uganda, where thousands of cameras are watching over to follow or track political opponents, should be somehow ruled out as soon as possible. That was my, I'd like to close my remark by wishing a fruitful discussion today.
Thank you, Director General Saida. Let's turn to the question session. You both talked about the generosity of the American and Japanese people in this moment of crisis. And in particular, Director General Saida, you mentioned that friends in need are friends indeed. And I was hoping to ask you both to maybe expound on that principle and maybe think a little bit about, or talk a little bit about why it is important for the United States and Japan to be generous, particularly at this moment, and even at a time when, certainly at least in the United States, millions of Americans are still coping with this disease and in need of assistance themselves. So as we're still struggling with this at home, why is it still important for the United States to be providing foreign assistance? Why is it still important for democratic countries like the US and Japan to be engaging with the developing world? Maybe we can start with you, Director Richardson.
Thanks for the question, Blaise. That's a great question, and it's something that's really important for us to talk about, the connection between our domestic response and the fact we do need to keep our people safe, and Japan is in the same boat. We want to keep our people safe, but the way that we do that is by providing assistance around the world as well. This pandemic has taught us more than even the ones of the past that the interconnectivity between the United States and the rest of the world is unbreakable, and that what happens in one country doesn't just stay there, and it doesn't just impact the developing world. If you had asked me 6 months ago about a pandemic, I probably would have said, it probably will start in China and ravish the developing world. Only half of that ended up being true. So we really do need to appreciate that what happens in an outbreak, keeping that outbreak from becoming a pandemic, isn't just something we would like to do. It's something we have to do because that's vital to our ability to provide safety and security and health for our own people.
Thanks. Director General Saida, could you expound on the principle of friends in need are friends indeed, and the sort of strategic thinking that guides Japan's development assistance?
Well, our idea was really what I mentioned. Friends in need and friends in need. That means our development assistance in such a pandemic situation has a more impact on the sentiment of recipient countries, including those in Africa, that Japan, of course, as well the United States and the Western countries really stand by their side. And this is, on the other hand, it might be also the chance for alternate donor to beef up their influence in the recipient countries. In that sense, we have very carefully chosen the recipient countries, and we did as much as possible the kind of to try to strike a right balance in the respective recipient countries, taking into consideration of the influence of alternate donor. In this sense, I would like to emphasize here that the U.S. and Japan coordination should be has been a very good one, but should be more intensified. We do know that we do welcome the establishment of DFC and its Blue Dot Network, and have been discussed with our U.S. counterparts quite often in Tokyo, both in Tokyo and Washington. But despite the COVID crisis, we should maintain this momentum and strike a more coordination on the pandemic response.
Thank you. Professor Aizawa?
Thank you very much, Director Richardson and Director General Saida. I cannot agree more on all the important points, and it's a challenging moment. And one of the new challenge we see from this COVID-19 crisis is its impact on the age group. A lot of conventional healthcare issue, we targeted assistance onto lower class and lower income class and infants. But this one has a new aspect. It's the aging society or the aging group. I think this particularly goes to Director General Saida. Because Japan is well known as the aged society, we have our challenges domestically, but maybe this is the moment that we could address the learned lessons that we have, and even we could take a leadership on this. Have you seen any aspect of this new challenge in pandemic that targets this age group to be in a global cooperation moment? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Aizawa, for your question. And in development assistance sphere, we actually, to be honest, we haven't put a great focus on the aging society or particular group of particular age. But because in most of the developing countries, this problem is currently at least not so serious as compared with the problem we are facing. But some are saying that Africa and then the COVID-19 impact in Africa is limited due to the demographic status, so many young people. But having learned from our own experience that the aged people, aging society is really vulnerable, even in the highly developed countries. We should, learn from the lessons, and we should also consider to, put this factor in our technical assistance in the near future.
Thank you, Director General Saida. And Director Richardson, let me turn to you. You mentioned in your opening remarks the various venues that the United States has for cooperation with like-minded partners, such as Japan, including the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and the Global Fund and others. What does that international cooperation look like now in this crisis moment of the pandemic? Is it sufficient? Is there need for more, as Director General Saida was saying previously? And how do we work towards getting that cooperation that we need?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I would say that working with our allies and friends like Japan and the other sort of mainstream donor community is essential. We've built institutions and relationships over the many years that we then leverage in times of crisis like this. And so we are allowing the system to do that coordination, and we do coordination in Tokyo and in Washington and in Rwanda and in Malawi and places all around the world. And so there are lots of places to do that coordination. I always and the first one to agree with what the Director General mentioned is that greater coordination, greater cooperation, looking for opportunities to leverage our comparative strengths, going in together, in the Pacific Islands and working with Japan and New Zealand and Australia collaboratively. That provides a great deal of strength and unity of purpose. And together we will be more impactful than we would be alone. I would say that actually in thinking about coming out of this pandemic and sort of what comes next, I would say that this pandemic has demonstrated shortfalls in the international system. That we do have the Global Fund, we do have the World Health Organization, and yet we still have had this massive challenge where a pandemic or an outbreak was allowed to go out of control and to become a pandemic and have ravaged both the developed and the developing world both. So we need to take lessons learned from that, and not necessarily assign blame, but just sort of acknowledge that I think there are some gaps in the international system. I think we are not necessarily structured as an international system to appropriately prevent, detect, prevent, and respond to infectious disease outbreaks and prevent them from becoming pandemics. And so we do need to start thinking about, how do we work together? How do we have early warning systems for pandemics? How do we share data regionally and globally
How do we ensure accountability is built into the system, that countries just allow for international observers to come in order to be able to have the right samples to see the disease outbreak, and that we build that transparency and accountability on the front end. So I think there are some gaps in the international system that this pandemic has demonstrated. And I think it's a really important opportunity to work with all of our like-minded partners around the world to say, how can we fill those gaps strategically, not duplicate anything else that anyone else is doing, but is there a role for us to increase that level of coordination and cooperation in order to potentially prevent the next outbreak from becoming a pandemic?
Thank you very much, Director Richardson. I want to take that point to the next question. I think I fully agree that we have learned the shortcomings of the current international cooperation model. I mean, including the WHO. We have all these international organizations that are there to be ready for. And this is the moment we could create a new system in order to prepare for the next pandemic. The good side, or the bright side that I see, and especially in the United States, is the role of the philanthropic foundations. It's not only the government or the international organization, but the increasing role of the philanthropic foundation is visible. And with all the technology now innovating in one way or another, is increasing its position in addressing the issues. Now, the question is, how would the role of, for example, I say the three players here, governments, international organizations, and these major philanthropic organizations can be well coordinated to the coming, say, the next pandemic or to the coming decades? I would like to hear your ideas on how we could cooperate or how we could share roles in the coming crisis ahead. Thank you.
Is it close to me, Dr. Aizawa?
First, the question, if I may ask this question first to Director Richardson and then also to Director Saida too, that would be great. Thank you very much.
No, thanks. I was going to defer to the Director General. I'm sure he has, but let me start. Look, we have amazing philanthropic organizations in the United States, and we have them around the world, and Japan as well. The Japanese people are incredibly generous, and as are the American people, and so we've seen that demonstrated very clearly. I think having that coordination, as you know, just as we have seen with both the Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines, and the Global Fund and CEPI as well, and some other sort of well-known organizations, we have a real opportunity to link the philanthropic and the private sector with the government organizations and the multilateral institutions. You know, so far, the American people, through philanthropics or other charitable donations, have already provided almost $5 billion in addition to what the American government has provided. And we want to find a way to continue to support that and channel that to be the most impactful as we can possibly do. If we rely on ODA, on official development assistance alone to cure the world's ails, we've already lost. We really do need to think about not just the philanthropic, but I mean, Japan has the most amazing corporations, as does the United States. How do we get those private sector entities to leverage their expertise into helping solve the world's greatest problems? They want to be part of the solution, and I think we need to find avenues and venues and mechanisms to be able to pull in the U.S. private sector, be able to pull in the Japanese private sector in order to be able to leverage, in order to have greater impact than we could do alone.
Thank you very much, Director Richardson. Director General Saida, may I ask you the question as
yes,
well?
I totally with Director Richardson in the point that to his remarks on the importance of the involvement of the private sector. This must be further pursued in coordination, in close coordination between Japan and the US, including on the framework of Blue Dot Network. On the previous point, I just want to echo the Mr. Richardson's remark on our great track record, beginning from starting from 2001 in Okinawa, which produced a really crucial international organizations like a Global Fund. And we are parents or father and mother of these great creatures, and we should at the same time be responsible to keep them functional. In that sense, on the crisis, in this context, we have agreed upon the comprehensive review of WTO in due course. At the same time, on the Global Fund, I'm actually one of the board members of the Global Fund, and with Professor Brooks, I've been maintaining a really good relationship. And this the major one of the most major player of the Global Fund is, as you all know, the Gates Foundation, and governments and NGOs are all gathered to operate these fantastic international organizations. But compared with the US, Japan is a little bit weak in mobilizing the philanthropic foundations on the private sector. So I do believe that we need much more endeavor to involve them in the near future.
Thank you both for those comments. Let me perhaps address this question first to Director General Saida, and then obviously would love to get your thoughts, Director Richardson, as well. You both talked about the differences between the way that the US and Japan approach development assistance on the one hand, and the way that authoritarian states like China approach it on the other, and the shared values of accountability and transparency that the US and Japan pursue versus the exploitation that China seeks through the assistance that it offers. I guess my question is, given that difference in models and given that at least seemingly what the US and Japan offer should be such a better deal for developing countries, how much traction is the Chinese model getting? Why is it, if it is being successful, why is it able to be successful? And what would happen if it were to prove to become the preeminent model for development assistance, if it were to supplant and surpass the way that the US and Japan and other democratic countries provide assistance?
Okay, that's really a good question. Thanks for asking me this. US, Japan, in the world, what the US and Japan have been seeking for is kind of a, we want to be a global good. And, we have established a global system which is really conducive to the fair and equal world, including the developing countries. And we haven't pursued to a more geopolitical influence, in a sense, in the developing countries by posing a threat, including the military one, or even by setting up a debt trap by extending them in a non-transparent manner, and as well as with a much higher interest rate than it is allowed in OECD DAC countries. So, but alternate donors pursuit has been really persistent, and it is really even in the crisis, they are still persistently pursuing the value it has been pursuing. So that's why I use the wording of roaring back. We should keep our coordination and alliance close, and to at least to form a counterbalance to them. And Australia, as Mr. Richardson mentioned, is really a key player to promote our common initiative. Also, together with the other developed countries like from Europe, we should hang on, and we should keep our initiative, and we should keep upholding our values, and should keep countering the momentum that they are now promoting. Otherwise, we are on the brink of otherwise, we should face another scenery where the existing international system on which we are really rely will order in their interest.
It's great. Let me just add to that. My very last trip before the pandemic hit, I traveled to a couple countries in Africa, and in one of those visits, we had a great meeting with the governments and African governments, and they were very clear. They said, you know what, China came in, they had a big proposal. It sounded great. It sounded like a lot of money. We took the deal, and we thought it was a gift, but it turned out to be a poison gift. And that's the story that we hear time and time again. People are, unless you're part of that elite that is getting kickbacks from the developing countries, if they're part of that elite that's getting kickbacks from the Chinese, unless you're that crew, you've not seen the benefits of these types of deals. And in fact, so often they're mortgaging their country's futures. They're mortgaging their strategic assets, their mineral rights, their port access. And it turns out that it's just not a very good deal. And I think there is a lot of opportunity for us to work together with the Japanese and other donors to clearly articulate that the deals that are being offered sound great, but end up being really detrimental to, one, their country's own development and progress, but two, could potentially hold them back by providing unsustainable debt or sort of loss of their inheritance as a nation. We've seen the Chinese time and time again during this pandemic come in and offer either faulty equipment or conditional equipment or assistance, but you have to put out a press release praising the Chinese Communist Party. That's not what the world should expect of the epicenter of the pandemic. The Chinese Communist Party has an obligation to go above and beyond to provide unfettered, no strings attached, high quality assistance in response to this crisis, and then really help turn the corner and join the rest of the developing world to provide accountable, transparent, high quality, impactful, and truly assistance that helps the global order and helps the countries that we are investing in. And I just urge them to take the different paths, because countries around the world are seeing this assistance for what it is, which is a poison gift, that is a gift that is designed to benefit the elite in China and not the people that are on the front lines of countries around the world.
Thank you very much to both of you. Because the comments you just made are so important, I just want to push a little bit further. I think we all agree that the lesson we learned are very important, especially if we look at the shortcomings of the current international organization or the malpractices of China onto the development assistance, especially on the healthcare. I think we all agree that we need to work together, especially the US, Japan, and other like-minded countries like Australia, as Director General Saida has mentioned. I really want to take this point to address how could we do this? For example, you mentioned the importance of transparency, accountability. How could we enhance those transparency and accountability? And what are the best practices, would you think? I know this is a premature question maybe, but as we share our common development goals, how could we do better on this issue? I really want to hear this point from both of you.
Sure, I can start and then I'll turn it over to the Director General. I think there's a roadmap that we have already built in terms of U.S.-Japanese relations. We've invested quite heavily over the past couple of years in digital strategies and energy strategies with a couple really great pilot programs where we've co-designed solutions for the Pacific Islands and Southeast Asia, working together with the Japanese. So I think it's absolutely possible. There's always challenges when doing better coordination, not just with the Japanese, but with the South Koreans, with the French, with the Germans. Everybody has their own decision-making model, right? They make decisions different places. They all have money that is appropriated provided by their national legislatures at a certain time. The timeline for getting approvals don't always sync up. It is a lot harder than what it sounds like, but I think we can use the experience with JUSEP and some of the other programs that we have launched with the Japanese as a template. My preference would be to start early and think about the long term. I think waiting till the moment where a check needs to be written to engage our partners is the wrong time. Nobody has extra money laying around that they can just provide on a whim. We really need to design programs together from the ground up, working as equals with the country that we are investing in. And then that allows for those differences in both decision making and timing of resources to be overcome. But Director General, you probably have a better insight in this than I do.
Yeah, I just for the supplement, you really your foresightful and insightful statement that yes, we do have a series of roadmaps, including our agreement on energy development in Africa. This has been renewed every time at the occasion of a TCAD meeting, and I myself was engaged in the revision of our energy cooperation agenda last year in Yokohama. And accountability and transparency. These have been already the guiding principle of OECD DAC members. So it's not at all premature or something like that. We should build on our decades-long pursuit of these ideas. And one of the good examples could be our high-quality infrastructure initiative, which was agreed upon among the G20. This is important. The G20, including China and Russia, in Osaka last year.
Well, with that, let me thank both Director General Saida and Director Richardson for joining us today. They've spoken of the importance of generosity and cooperation and helping developing countries in this critical time, but they've also been incredibly generous with their time and cooperative in their discussion today. So let me thank them for joining us, and thank also Professor Aizawa for his insightful questions. And thank all of you for watching, and remind you that for more events and in-depth research on topics like this and many others, please tune into hudson.org. And so thank you all, and hope to see you, especially Director General Saida, hope to welcome you to DC very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.